Eric, a devoted father and kind-hearted man, never imagined that a routine drive home would lead him into the darkest chapter of his life. One fateful evening, as he was heading home to his wife and children, everything changed. After a random traffic stop by Officer Rick Daniels, Eric found himself arrested and wrongfully accused of a crime he didn't commit. Despite his innocence, Eric's pleas fell on deaf ears as the officer's lies sent him to prison for years. But what Eric uncovered on his fight for justice would not only expose the truth, it would leave a judge in tears and change his life forever. What shocking truth has been hidden beneath the officer's lies, and how did Eric's resilience and forgiveness unravel a system of corruption? Stay tuned to find out, but before we dive in, let us know where you are watching from today, and if Eric's story of strength and redemption speaks to you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Eric Johnson was an ordinary man living in a busy American city. A devoted father, he worked long hours at a local factory to provide for his family. His wife, Lisa, stayed home to care for their two children, Darnell and Ava. Life was stable, until one fateful night when everything changed. Officer Rick Daniels, a decorated cop, arrested Eric on charges of armed robbery. Eric protested his innocence, but Daniels had made up his mind, setting in motion a series of lies that would send Eric's world crashing down. The next morning, Eric found himself handcuffed in front of his family as his neighbors looked on in shock. The charges were heavy: armed robbery, possession of illegal firearms, and assault. The evidence against Eric seemed damning, but it was all fabricated by Officer Daniels. The media quickly picked up the story, painting Eric as a dangerous criminal. As the public turned against him, Eric's wife, Lisa, struggled to keep her family together. Eric's trial was swift. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, Officer Daniels' testimony was powerful. The prosecution presented falsified evidence, and Eric's court-appointed lawyer was ill-prepared to fight back. Judge Mary Armstrong, known for being tough on crime, was unsympathetic, sentencing Eric to 15 years in prison. The gavel struck, and Eric's fate was sealed. Prison life was a brutal adjustment for Eric. Separated from his family, he faced violence and abuse from both guards and inmates. Marcus, a wise old man serving a life sentence, became his mentor. Marcus taught him how to survive, offering advice on navigating the harsh realities of prison life while holding on to hope. Meanwhile, on the outside, Lisa had not given up on her husband. She reached out to journalists and activists, but it was Lisa, a determined investigative journalist, who took a serious interest in Eric's case. She uncovered inconsistencies in Officer Daniels' past and began to see a pattern of wrongful convictions. As Lisa dug deeper, she found links between Daniels and a local crime syndicate, raising suspicions that Eric had been framed. Lisa's investigation began to bear fruit. She connected with other victims of Officer Daniels' corruption, and the puzzle pieces started to come together. When she reached out to Lisa, Eric's wife, the two women formed an unbreakable bond, united by their desire to prove Eric's innocence. Together, they gathered evidence, including eyewitness testimonies and security footage that contradicted Daniels' claims. Inside the prison, tensions had been building for months, and a violent riot erupted in Eric's cell block. The guards were overwhelmed, and prisoners took control of several areas. Eric found himself caught in the chaos, forced to defend himself against rival inmates. His years of pent-up frustration and anger bubbled to the surface as he fought for survival. During the riot, Eric saved the life of a prison reform activist named Malcolm Jacobs, who had been visiting to speak about wrongful convictions. Malcolm, seeing Eric's strength and resilience, promised to help fight for his release. Word of the prison riot reached the media, and Eric's name began to surface again. Malcolm Jacobs used his connections to bring Eric's case to the attention of Mark Reynolds, a high-profile civil rights attorney with a reputation for overturning wrongful convictions. Mark was moved by Eric's story and took on his case pro bono. Armed with new evidence uncovered by Lisa, Mark filed for an appeal, requesting a retrial. The wheels of justice, slow as they were, finally started to turn in Eric's favor. As Lisa's investigation continued, she uncovered a mountain of evidence implicating Officer Daniels in a larger criminal conspiracy. Daniels had been working with a local drug cartel, framing innocent black men like Eric to cover up his own illegal activities. Daniels' colleagues, once loyal to him, began to turn against him as the investigation intensified. Eventually, Daniels was arrested, and the truth about his corruption started to unravel. The city was thrown into turmoil as more cases tied to Daniels were called into question, sparking outrage from the public. Eric's retrial was set, and the courtroom was packed with media, activists, and members of the community who had been following his case. Judge Mary Armstrong, the same judge who had originally sentenced him, was once again presiding. This time, however, the evidence against Officer Daniels was overwhelming, and Eric's new legal team was prepared. The stakes were high, and the city was watching closely. Tension filled the air as Eric took the stand, telling his side of the story for the first time in years. Officer Daniels was called to testify, but his once unshakable confidence had crumbled. Under intense cross-examination by Mark Reynolds, Daniels' lies were exposed. Piece by piece, the fabricated evidence was dismantled, and the truth about the corrupt cop's actions was laid bare for the court to see. Daniels, who had once stood tall as a respected officer, now looked defeated. Judge Armstrong, who had been stern and cold during Eric's initial trial, began to show signs of guilt and remorse as the reality of the injustice she had played a role in became clear. The courtroom held its breath as Judge Armstrong prepared to give her ruling. In a powerful moment, she tearfully declared Eric innocent, exonerating him of all charges. The crowd erupted into applause, but Eric, his heart heavy with the weight of the years he had lost, remained composed. As Judge Armstrong descended from the bench, she offered Eric an apology, her voice trembling with emotion. In a stunning act of grace, Eric reached out and took her hand. The courtroom was stunned as Eric, the man who had suffered so much, extended forgiveness to the judge who had sentenced him. Eric was finally free, but life outside of prison was not easy. Reuniting with his family after so many years was bittersweet. Darnell and Ava had grown up without him, and the gap left by his absence weighed heavily on them all. Eric struggled to adjust to a world that had moved on without him, but he was determined to rebuild his life. His story, however, was far from over. News outlets across the country picked up on his case, and Eric became a symbol of both the injustice of the system and the power of forgiveness. Eric, with the support of Malcolm Jacobs and Mark Reynolds, became an advocate for prison reform and the rights of wrongfully convicted individuals. He spoke at rallies, lobbied lawmakers, and shared his story on national platforms. Eric's case sparked a movement, with calls for accountability within the police force and the justice system. His focus was not only on seeking justice for himself but also for the countless others who had been wronged by the system. Through his advocacy, Eric began to heal, finding purpose in fighting for others. Though Eric had won his freedom, the fight for justice was far from over. Corruption still ran deep within the system, and the battle against wrongful convictions was ongoing. Eric continued to work tirelessly, determined to make sure no one else would suffer the same fate he had. His story, a tale of resilience, hope, and forgiveness, resonated with people across the country. As the years passed, Eric's name became synonymous with the fight for justice, a reminder that the battle for truth is never ending.